Oh, hi, Alex.
Hey Neta.
Okay, I'm really glad that we're doing this and you're giving us, me and Hans Welling, the opportunity to actually present this model that we've been really working on for a long time. The model is actually mapping kind of three triangles of pain. And I'll say a little bit about how we got there, and then I'll explain the three triangles and the ideas. um, because this is really like it's coming from a place where we as supervisors and therapists, but mainly as supervisor, we're really trying to find a way to help supervisees in all these sessions when you see the tape and you're not sure what's actually going wrong or what is going right, and to try and conceptualize the way that we can help them actually direct their therapy. And especially, I think after teaching portrayals and really helping our supervisees being really able to go into portrayals and get and activate the pain and get things going and really like get the patient into the situation, we started finding out that many times the problem is actually to kind of how do you actually know what kind of transformation the patient needs? So many times it's, you just go there and you ask the patient, what would you want to do now? What would you like to say? What does it need? And you have all these general questions, which are extremely helpful. And in many times they just take you to the right way, kind of, the inner knowledge of the patient and like your own intuition. And it kind of goes together in such a nice harmonic way. But then there were other places that you could actually see that something is coming up and there's a really nice portrayal. The therapist works nicely, things happen, but it's not actually transforming what was really bothering the patient and what he's really suffering from. And we started to see that when we look at portrayals and when we try to figure out what actually is going on, and I'm talking about portrayals, but it's actually true of a big area of experiential tasks and techniques and works, which actually are common to many different experiential uh, therapies and strategies. And so what we actually were seeing, we were starting to see that there are actually different kinds of emotional pain or different things people are suffering from, and they actually correlate to specific transformational needs, or saying it another way, transformational processes. And we could start to discern actually these three different types of pains, which when we started investing into them, we could see these were like domains of pain, like a whole dynamic of pain, which has its specific origin, the way it develops. It usually has to do with some specific circumstances, age, developmental ability of the child in terms of emotion and in terms of cognitive abilities. And so all these circumstances create some kind of dynamic of pain. And we also saw that this pain has its typical defenses, which means the way the child is trying to cope with all these problems the best he can at the time that this is happening. And that these actually have the structure. And if we can actually identify the structure, we can understand what needs to be transformed. And if we understand what needs to be transformed, which is taken away from the pain itself, we can then actually also find the best technique that actually helps transforming it. So this is really the heart of the matter. We see the suffering of the patient, and we can actually start looking at this pattern of what pain is active now, or what pain is actually really bringing in the suffering, and then how do we identify it, find it, and then transform it. And we actually saw that this really, like, this is a big forest with many trees, has like, in a general, like three major kinds of trees or patterns of trees, whatever you want, a family of trees is maybe better, which each of them have their specific attributes and their specific little things, and we could start seeing them coming. So I will now, we will not go deeply into this because of course it's serious. The transformations are many times quite complex, but in a general sense, I think in half an hour, I can really kind of present these three dynamics of pain and their transformational patterns that go with them, that correlate to them actually. Okay, so we actually have three domains of pain or dynamics of pain. We're actually not that sure of the name, and we will be glad to have some help there. But the three are the first one we call core emotional pain. I'll just present them now and then I'll get more specific. The second one we call relational pain. And the third one we call self-pain. And these are really the three big domains we're going to look at. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to present each one of them. And I'll start with explain the pain, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we identify what are like kind of the markers. What do patients say when they feel it? And then we'll go to how they're actually transformed, and like just in a nutshell, basic techniques that can be helpful in doing this transformation. So I'll start with the core emotional pain, which is actually a very common pain we see a lot. And it's kind of the first one, or maybe in a way, it's the most simple pain in terms of structure. And that is actually the pain that we feel when we have a very, very strong emotion. And it's so strong, and we feel it so strong, like in a traumatic situation, or when we're very young and we don't have much resources, and we start feeling this pain, and then we have the experience that if I continue feeling this pain, I will collapse, I will die, I will disintegrate. This is too much for me. Okay, the biggest like typical thing would be thinking of grieving of a very dear person that you lost. And you start feeling the pain, and then you have patients coming in and saying, I can't handle this loss. If I feel this, I die. If I feel this, I collapse. If I start crying about this, I'll never stop. So the markers are these situations where the patient really feels that there is some emotion that he really doesn't want to feel. And what actually the child or the person who feels this pain does when it happens is, since it's so hard and it's so overwhelming, and he doesn't have enough resources, okay, either he's alone or he's very young, or it's really radical situation, and he doesn't have enough resources to process this pain, not in the situation itself and not close by, the minutes or hours after. Actually, what happens is he has to dissociate from it. He has to find a way not to feel it anymore. He has to find a way not to react to triggers that actually bring this pain from the environment. Because once you feel this kind of pain, it gets associated with the triggers. So if it's maybe you lost your mother when you were 3 years old, so maybe many things that have to do with the situation or mothers or sometimes the emotion itself will trigger you. And then what you will do is you just dissociate. So actually the suffering, the nutshell of the suffering is really feeling this pain, this massive pain stuck in a way in the body. You feel the emotion in the body. So it kind of feels it's stuck in the body, and you can't continue. So you can't continue feeling it. And you cannot really go into the action tendency that actually will complete it. So if it's really like grief, then the action tendency of crying, or if it's really rage, it's the action tendency of attacking, or if it's fear, it's the action tendency of going or of escaping, and you can't do that. And so actually the pain kind of is felt as it's stuck, okay? So that will be the first triangle. And this is what we call core emotional pain, okay? Because the source of the pain is actually core emotion stuck in the body, okay? And I'm not going into what emotions can be core emotions, blah, blah, blah. We'll leave that to a different discussion. But this is like intuitively, you can see these are very strong emotional pain, which are very basic reactions to a situation that you're trapped in or that you can't escape and you can't deal with. Okay, so that's like the trauma. We can say that's like the big trauma narrative, right? There is a traumatic event and I feel. And so we can see that the main defense would be basically dissociation or disconnecting in various ways. Okay, so we'd have two groups of patients who are really triggered and feel overwhelmed many times, and they just get to the pain and then they're like, oh my God, paralyzed, or patients who are just really disconnected, not feeling anything. So I can recall a patient coming after losing her husband and saying, I don't feel anything. Am I a robot? What's going on here? It doesn't make sense that I'm not feeling anything. And just this numbness is driving me crazy. Okay, so we can have these kind of symptoms that indicate that this is what's going on. Okay, so this would be what we were saying, core emotional pain. So how we transform it. So the idea of transforming it is actually the therapist helping the patient actually do two things which are very difficult. One is activating the pain and starting to feel it, bringing it again, okay? And the other part would be bringing in more resources. So this time the patient does not shoot out of his window of tolerance or doesn't get totally overwhelmed, okay? But this time it can really, really go back to the situation, feel the pain, or the way that Diana calls it, feel the emotion to completion, or what Greenberg will say, feel the emotion until another emotion, a good one comes, or whatever we're talking about. And it's of course, it's important to mention that we are talking about memory reconsolidation as a primary idea of how emotions are transformed and how suffering and pain is transformed. So we're doing this, if we look at it in the terms of memory reconsolidation, we're activating the core emotional pain. And now, instead of making it unbearable, we're bringing in more resources so the patient can actually have a new experience of this emotion and then recode it as something bearable and not as something unbearable that would actually disintegrate it. Okay, so this would be the basic core emotion. Now, the techniques that we usually would use for doing this would be classically either a portrayal going back to the situation, or even the patient just telling us about the situation in a very detailed way, and we're there present in a very, very clear, explicit way, warm, accepting, helping, guiding, or sometimes bringing other imaginal figures like, you know, your beloved grandmother, or even the Dalai Lama, or God himself, or whoever can really give you the idea that you're protected, you're supported, and if you will need any more resources, they're there, okay? Of course, it can also be the adult patient. Now, the patient today, if this thing happened long ago, would be enough, okay, maybe. Okay, so if something happened when I was like 2 or 3 years old, maybe now when I'm 40 or 35, I can go back there and bring resources myself. But the idea is bringing more resources, and there are many techniques that are taken from many years of very good trauma therapy, which can be, you know, unblending and titrating and pendulating and all these things that can help us also make the pain more manageable and still activated, okay? So this is what we're actually looking for, okay, in triangle 1. So I think that would be triangle 1, core emotional pain for now. Okay, and we'll go now to the other kind of world of pain or realm of pain, which is the relational pain. And this is actually originates from a very, very different situation. And the situation is the basic relationship between the child and the parent, and how the child actually deals with this basic conflict of wanting to express himself, having all these needs from the attachment figure, but also really needing in terms of, you know, he has to have the connection and the protection of the attachment figure. And so it turns out that in many different situations, contexts, instances, if he really expresses himself fully, like expresses his anger or expresses his frustration or his sadness or his weakness, his parent kind of, he doesn't go away, but he goes away emotionally, or attacks him, right? He doesn't like this. Don't cry like a baby, or, this is like, a prototype thing, or the parent would just ignore, or the parent will just ignore the need or attack the need. Mommy, I really want you to sleep next to me. I'm so frightened. In your age, children should sleep alone. It's not a big deal. Or, yeah, okay, I'll come in a few minutes, and then mother never comes, or whatever, these very, very common situations. Of course, not every time this thing happens, we will have a correlational pain. But when things keep on happening in some patterns in this relationship, and the child starts to understand that these things, that if he express needs or emotions, if he expresses them, he actually loses the love and the protection of the parent and he starts seeing that, then he starts to have this conflict. And usually, since he needs the parent, that's a survival need. He needs the attachment figure there, especially when he's very young. Then he will definitely try to not express this emotion or this need that the parent doesn't like, or the parent doesn't approve of, or any way this happens. So then the child actually starts kind of suppressing the expression. And many times it's the best way to suppress the expression and to make sure it never, it never comes out, is really kind of suppressing it also from your own, your own feeling, just not feeling it, avoiding feeling it in a way, or maybe substituting another emotion instead of this emotion. When I'm afraid, if that's like too dangerous, then maybe I can say I'm sad, or maybe I can say I'm angry, or something else that will help me get the parent. So we're starting to see these kind of systems that many things are learned that they shouldn't be expressed. And another big thing here, that there's a constant worry or fear of losing the parent's love. Okay, so we're actually having this pain, which is a little more complex, as you can see, right? Because it has the part of not expressing the needs and not having the needs met, right? So you feel kind of hungry for some things, you don't even know exactly for what, and you also feel like abstained from expressing some things. And then you also have this fear or concern about losing the love of the parent. You're not sure he'll always be there. Maybe I'll do something and he will not be available for me. So you have this fear that's also causing pain. And you have this pain of, I'm not fully alive, authentic. I'm not varied as I can be. I'm kind of constricted in a way. Okay, so this is the pain that we will see. Now, this comes up usually in sessions, and we will see the markers. First of all, usually it's about relationships. It's people talking about, well, my partner never gets me, he never answers my needs, or the other way around. I'm always there for him, and I don't know, when I don't know what I want, and he asks and I have no way, and I don't know, or just many other constant conflicts. Okay, it can be also a lot of problems with intimacy. I don't feel close because I don't feel that I'm really expressing myself with this person. There's things I'm afraid I can't express. Or sometimes it's like these realms of emotion. We see a patient in the room and somehow he's never angry. Every time something really happens and I'm not angry. No, I can see his side. I see what he wanted to get, or all these things. Or we can see all these patients, many times, young adults. I'm so afraid to get into this relationship because I don't know, I'll be stuck in this relationship, and then I'll always be afraid to disappoint this person, or I'll always be afraid to be dependent, or all these people that have this issue of being really, I'm self-sufficient, and it becomes like kind of an ideology. I don't want to need anything from anybody. I really want to be self-sufficient. Okay. So we see all these things. I'm talking about the big picture, but we see them in the session. Okay. We see the way they come after a conflict with a partner. And of course, it's really classical that it happens with a partner, but it can happen with your child. And it can happen sometimes in some circumstances with a boss. If this is a really like very important boss, and he's really becoming an attachment figure, like in many times happen in academic settings, when the boss is also somebody who's guiding you and somebody who's like a father figure or mother figure for you. So we can see this really in these realms, okay? So that's like the picture of what we will call relational pain, since it originates from conflicts and problems in the relationship. So how do we transform this? Okay, so we actually have to find a way to crack this conflict in a way, okay, that it kind of reintegrates back. So we have to first help the patient, we have to validate the patient's needs, either their needs that he needs something from another person, or, you know, the basic need to express yourself, to be yourself, to express these emotions, whatever they are, anger or sadness or weakness or fear. So we have to start by this kind of a work of validating, but that's not enough, right? That would be enough maybe in triangle 1, but now we have this whole issue of really expressing. So we really have to be sure that during this transformation process of triangle 2, we actually get to express this, and not express this to the world, but express this exactly to the person we were afraid to express it, or whatever, whoever sits in his place, okay? So I have to find a way to express the needs and express these emotions in an encounter, usually imaginary encounter, with the attachment figure or significant other, or wherever we are, partner, okay? And we usually prefer going back to where these things were learned. And these things are usually learned in childhood, from the point there is an attachment relationship all the way till like the end of maybe the Oedipal conflict around the age of 5 or 6. Usually the basics are learned there. Of course, we still learn and we still develop, but very typically we find patients going back to this age, okay, many times, okay, not always. And so actually, this is the age when the child is negotiating it. So now we're going back with the patient to whatever typical situation where he felt this something that he needed to express. He was violated and he needed to express anger. His needs were not met and he wanted to reinforce them, or he needed love and he didn't get it, or he needed recognition and he didn't get it. And so we go back there. Now we're actually interacting. This is the most classical structure is the unfinished business task in EFT, right? When that's what you actually do. So this is part 1 of the thing of the transformation. And the other part is now after I expressed it. So if I express it, then the parent is gone, or the parent disapproves me. So okay, that's very nice. So we just re-traumatized the whole thing. Okay, so that's not the idea. So now we have to go to the other part, which is some kind of reconnection. And this reconnection can take 3 different forms. The best, the nice story is when the parent actually acknowledges the need that you didn't get. And now he says, oh, I feel so bad. I actually thought these things. I actually did appreciate you. I actually did recognize you, or I can understand your anger, or now I can see it. So the parent goes to some kind of expressing his remorse or his bad feelings about hurting you. And then the reconnection actually happens because the patient can now feel the good intentions of the parent. So he gets the love again. If I feel bad that I hurt you, that means I love you. So then that's the really nicest part that happens many times, but not always. Another option is that the parent cannot see it. He doesn't have it either because he's preoccupied with himself, or it's a different generation, or he's very weak himself, and he can't tolerate it. He gets overwhelmed with guilt or whatever, right? And the parent cannot do it. Then the other option is kind of the option of kind of grieving the parent that I didn't have, or the aspects of the parent that I needed so much and didn't have. And it turns that grieving and really feeling this grief or mourning, there are many words for this in different systems, actually also helps you to reconnect to the fact that you love the parent, that the parent was very important for you. So you reconnect to this very important connection that you needed. And you can actually kind of internalize the lacking parent in a way. Okay? And there's another way, which is like even more complicated, is when the parent was really, really a very, I don't know, very terrible, hurting parent. Then another way is to actually feel the rage over the parent and really attack the parent. And after attacking the parent, we're standing next to the parent, and then we feel the guilt of hurting him. And again, the love for the parent will come again, and we can then integrate the anger or the rage toward the parent for what he didn't give us, and the love that we do have for him for just being our parent. So then we have this other integration process. Of course, all these are, we describe them in much more detail. And we can see that actually these are different ways, and different therapies do it in a different way to kind of get to this conflict. But so when we see this kind of relational pain, we have to go to a transformation that has expression, that has validation of needs, and that has the reconnection. Otherwise, it's not done. So it will not be enough just to stay with the pain of feeling humiliated by my father, or the pain of having to suppress my anger. That's not enough. We will have to express, and we will have to reconnect. Okay? And so this is really the in a nutshell, the relational pain story, or whatever we want to look at it. And then we get to the third world of pain, or dynamic of pain, or however, like this is this other thing, which we call self-pain. And the most important thing to remember here, and the name actually disguises it, is that the pain, the self-pain, is a pain we elicit from the relationship between the self and itself. Okay, that makes sense? Because we're going now we're going to a time when the child starts, he starts to make sense of himself, and he creates all these self-concepts. And we have all these self-concepts about ourselves, things we learned about ourselves from previous interactions, from traumatic events, from being or not being part of the social group. We learn all these things. We create these self-concepts. And sometimes, we create a self-concept, and we automatically attach a value to it. Is it good or is it not good? Okay, we attach a value in the context of the culture we're living in. It could be the family, but it can be our friends, and it can be the world, and it can be, I don't know, the world of therapists, or the world of mothers, or whatever, okay? And we kind of have this self-concept, and we attach a value to it. And if the value is good, we have a good emotion. We feel proud, we feel whole, we feel expressive, we feel alive. And if the value is not good, so this is me, I am not smart enough, or I am too ugly, or I am too fat, or I am too egocentric or bad, then the value is bad, and that creates very severe pain. This is really, really severe pain, of feeling really flawed and bad and not good enough. This is what we would call pathogenic shame, or really, very strong maladaptive shame. It has many names, okay? And it's like this really bad feeling of, okay, that goes in, okay? And actually, these negative self-concepts, which we're suffering from so much, we're actually get this value in order to protect us from being, I'm missing the word, from being marginalized or expelled from our social group, whether it's a family or it's a bigger social group like our friends. Okay, so we see this about ourselves, and it's important to see children do not have these self-concepts when they're very young. They tend to get them sometime between the age of 7, 9, 10. That's the age that they usually are stable about these concepts. If you take a 5-year-old and you ask him, give him a questionnaire, every week he will have different self-concepts, okay? But when you start testing children at the age of 7 or 8 or 9, these are quite stable notions about themselves, okay? Of course, they can change during life, but they have this tendency to be stable. So the child, which is young, is coming to school, and let's like take the most typical story, simple story, okay? He has learning disabilities, and he's entering first grade, okay? And he has to read, and now he gets all mixed up. The letters are jumping, and the teacher says, please read it aloud. And he starts to feel this really insecurity. If I can't read, I'm not part of this first grade thing. I'm not part of this group of children that can be so, together, and they're doing this thing, and they're reading, and they're becoming grown-ups, and all that, whatever kids feel at this age. And he starts feeling a lot of shame around being a bad reader. And this can stay as, I'm a bad reader. That's a nice story. But many times, okay, since reading is like your intelligence test when you're in first grade, I'm probably not intelligent enough. I don't have this thing that the other kids have. And so he starts having this bad feeling, but he's also very concerned that the other kids would know this about him. Because if they would know this, they would probably expel him, or, they're not going to be their friends, or his friends. They're not going to count him in or anything. So then he starts attacking himself, and he starts getting all these defenses to be sure that nobody's seeing that he's a bad reader. So he might avoid reading, or he might make himself read, or I don't know, whatever his strategy would be, but he would not like to talk about it, and we will ignore, or any other strategy he has. But the idea is, I have to know that I'm a bad reader, because that will help me to hide the fact that I'm a bad reader. Okay. And so this shaming or this pain just comes with hiding. And as we say many times, the best way to hide something is to hide it from the self. So many times this attack gets so severe that we actually just take this part, and we just, like in IFS, you put it in a dungeon, and you get a really strong door to hold. You just make sure that this stupid bad reader child will never be shown anywhere, okay? And then you actually get these self-concepts, which are organized in all these systems, and you start putting aside, and you start disconnecting some self-concepts from yourself and not showing them. And this is really painful, because it also makes you feel that you're not whole, that you're like, you feel this, that you're not free. You have all these things you have to be careful not to show, and you have all this, every time something happens, you have this pain of not being good enough and feeling so bad. Okay, and you're all the time, you're really concerned with, am I good enough to be part of this group? And you're really being concerned about being a part of the group. And if you're actually a part of the group, but you compromise many parts of yourself, then you don't feel that you were really accepted. You feel that you're like fitting in, but you're not belonging. And we get this pain of feeling lonely, in the sense that even when I'm around all these people, it's not really all of me. So there's this lonely feeling. So this goes with the feeling of loneliness, which is more a social loneliness. It's not lonely it's not lonely in the forest and I'm afraid. It's more like, lonely in terms, I don't have this clan around me. I'm not part of something that's supporting me, that's helping me. And this is also for social animals that we happen to be, is a total evolutionary need to be part of the social group. So this is really, really severe pain and fear. And it's really has to be acknowledged. It's a big thing in Western society. It's a very big thing, guys, because if in further in history, the family would be kind of a given social group, or the clan, it's much more complicated now in our days for many, many people. And so this is really something that's happening a lot. And also the tendency in Western culture to really put a value on self-concept is a very, very strong tendency. Everybody does it all the time. Okay, it has to do with this fitting in thing. Okay, so we actually are suffering from feeling that we're not as good as we should be, was not as good as we want to be, and we have to put all these parts aside. Okay, so transforming this, and we can see that there's a big conceptual element in this pain, right? It's not only the emotion like we had in the first triangle, and it's not only the expressing the emotion and you know, being in relationship. This is like, there's a whole concept about myself, about who I am and what value I attach to that. Okay, so there's a big conceptual thing here. And so to transform it, we will have to have a conceptual piece also. But really, really important, it's not, instead of reaching to the pain and the emotion of shame and humiliation that is attached to this feeling. So the work here is a little more complex. It's really described much more in our article and in other places because it's much more complex. But in a nutshell, I will explain. The idea is that the child actually makes these self-concepts in some context with his abilities. You know, he sees the world from a child's view. Okay, so for a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 16-year-old, there's a way the world works that he can, you know, pick up. And then he values his trait in that context. Okay, so he's shaming himself because the way he sees the world, this is a terrible thing. Okay, so what we will want to help in the transformation is actually going back to the pain, but this time, okay, starting to make an encounter between the adult self and that self part which was feeling shamed, in a portrayal or in any other way. Like really, IFS does it a lot, schema does it a lot. So we have this encounter between this, of course, ADP does it a lot, of intra-relational portrayals. So the adult self comes and actually kinds of context the young self, and we have to get compassion there. And this is not trivial. Because if now I'm looking at the fat girl I was when I was 9-year-old, even if I'm looking at the situation when my mother kept on telling me, if you look that fat, you'll never have friends, you will never find a husband, whatever. Still, when I'm looking at that fat girl and I don't like my fatity or whatever you call it, right? My obesity or anything, then I'm going to look at this girl and I'm saying, oh, this is a disgusting fat girl. So the first thing, we have to start getting compassion. The therapist has to be very helpful here. There are many different techniques to do it. You know, part of them, we're all describing them, but like basic techniques with the therapist leading with compassion. And the other technique would be maybe saying, if it was your young girl there, how would you feel about it? Another, and all these other, or if the Dalai Lama would stand there, what would he think about it? Or what would he feel towards that child? Or whatever manipulation we can to get some compassion in. And then we are actually going to have a really, and then when we get compassion, we really can hear the voice of the young self and how he sees things and how he feels and assesses the reality and how he learned that this part he has is so bad. And then we get the adult self now having this conversation with the young part in this encounter and starting to show him what he couldn't see back then. And if I'll go back to the learning disability example, which is just very easy to demonstrate, right? So now I know that you have a learning disability. You're not a stupid child. You're very smart, actually. And you can see you did this and that. You're very smart. But when you were 7, you were sure that if you can't read, you're stupid. And that's this is what you got from it, right? If I can't read, I'm stupid. But now, and I see the pain, and it really makes sense that that's what you're thinking because you're 7-year-old. But now I'm 45 or 30 or 26 or whatever. And I know that what you're actually feeling is your learning disability, which has nothing to do with being stupid. Okay. And then we call this phase reassessment, right? So we had compassion, we have going to the pain, to the situation, we have compassion, and then we have the reassessment. And the reassessment opens the possibility of reintegration. Okay, so now I can integrate this part that I've warded off of the stupid 7-year-old or the stupid me, and I can say, okay, now you're invited back in because you're actually not stupid, you have learning disability. And of course, the first things pops up to people's minds when we talk about it is, well, but what if you really have a bad trait? It's really bad. It's not just relatively bad. Okay, everybody would think it's bad. Okay, like, I don't know, you're missing an arm or whatever, which is bad enough. Okay, so when you go back there, then you can't say, oh, it's nothing, missing an arm isn't anything, it doesn't say anything about you, right? That's not going to help. So the integration would be using compassion again, but instead of kind of reassessing in the sense of reassessing what it means, it's reassessing its existential whatever, how do you say that? Existential value, right? And then we can start really feeling the pain of being born with one missing hand and kind of accepting it in that sense. This is so painful and hard, but it doesn't say anything essential bad about you. It's something you have. It's something you got. It's something you received from whatever. But it's not saying anything essential, and it's really painful, and I can see it. You're going to have so many years, it's going to be so painful. And it's so hard to find a place in society if you have these kind of thing that everybody looks as a defect, and it's really bothering you, and there's so many things you can't do. But this is another form of integration. And of course, many times it's both. It's some of this and some of that, and it's kind of integrated together. And the idea is the end is the feeling of integration, and this gives some kind of wholeness to the person. They say they feel right, they feel whole, they feel open, they feel more alive. These are the kind of things, because all these restrictions and separations and disconnections in the self kind of start. Now, we're not talking about a one session thing here, okay? You can understand. I'm just giving an example. Usually these self-concepts are connected to one another. It's like a web of different self-concepts, and you have to work on one and then another comes up. So this is quite a long process, right? Which we do again and again and again. And of course, the patient comes back, we met a process, we look at what he learned, and et cetera. So actually, we have actually seen that looking at any session, we can actually see in the session, in the first minutes usually, what is the issue that the patient is bringing, and what kind of pain is actually on the table. Is it triangle 1 pain? Is it triangle 2 pain? Is it triangle 3? And of course, we're not, you can make mistakes. You can start the transformation and see. Okay, and sometimes therapists prefer, I'll just go intuitively, but when I get stuck, now I have this map and I can find. So we really think this is a very, very helpful navigator for the therapist to find his way specifically to what transformation he actually needs to help and guide the patient go through, or you just help him and facilitate. And it's really helpful because you're not just lost. What do I do now? What happened? It's stuck, okay? oh, it's stuck. So maybe I'm doing, maybe I'm trying to do some triangle 3 and it's actually leaning on a trauma and I have to go there first. Okay. And I have to do triangle 1 before I can go to this triangle 3. Okay. So this is what we're actually proposing. And we think what's extremely helpful, and we think it's helpful for every kind of experiential therapy and maybe even more, because it's just a new way to kind of look at human pain and categorize it in a way that's just gives you guidance of where it needs to go. So that's that's our kind of take of it in an oral short version. So,
well, first of all, thank you so much, Neta. That's really cool. I know, or I hope you know, that I really care not just for you and Hans, but I really admire also your adventurous kind of thinking around these things. So it's just boosting me. I think you did a great job in distilling something that's very complex, right?
yeah,
So
ambitious.
very ambitious, but I like that. I respect that. I guess I just have one. I mean, we could go in so many directions. So I'm gonna
Okay.
keep it simple, and I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of different conversations over time. One question I wanted to ask you is that as you were talking, you made reference that triangle, the core emotional pain triangle, could be seen as a more simple kind of pain, and the further you go down into the self pain, it can be seen as a more complex, more nuanced kind of pain. Does that also mean, are you implying that the different triangles can be also a way to formulate client severity, meaning that actually someone having a type of pain will differentiate someone who will need more work, more time, because they are in a certain way instilled with a kind of pain that is more traumatic, more severe than others?
That's a good question. I'm not sure we're there in answering it. I think we have to see like more and think about it more. We've been starting kind of seeing this, and actually you're asking like, can we kind of formulate the patient, can we like make a case formulation for the patient? In a way, the answer is yes, but what makes a patient difficult is, I think, more complex in the way that how the triangles are combined to each other would really make a big
Right.
difference. So if we have a patient with a big triangle 3, which
Yeah.
is only leaning on social interactions, it's different than having him with a big triangle 3 that is leaning on a very traumatic event. Like I was seeing my father hitting my mother, and I felt totally helpless. And then when I become older, I have the self-concept of being no use to helping my dear people, or being a very weak person, right? So you can see a triangle 3 there hanging on a very severe triangle 1. And then you also have these examples, and I think maybe I can say that more, I'm not sure this is true, but maybe more complex patients are patients with their triangles are kind of intertwined in a way. If
Right.
we take the classical thing of, let's say, the terrible occasion when a parent is actually sexually abusing his daughter.
Yes.
So you can see there's a big triangle 1, of course,
Mhm.
and you can see there's a big triangle 2 of a big, big betrayal, and then you can also see the triangle 3 coming.
Yeah.
If I was sexually molested, something in me is probably wrong, right? So
Right.
you can see a big layering of all this. And then, and I think that's probably what makes
The client more
what will,
complex way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That leads to actually another question I want to ask you, and I'm sure that these are kind of tentative questions that I'll probably need more time to work out. Is how much are the triangles differentiated in the sense of like being individualized, or are they actually layers of pain? So what I mean by that is it possible to have a self pain that doesn't include one or two of their triangles? Because it seems like with the emotional pain triangle, it is possible to kind of have it stand alone more easily,
Mm-hmm.
but it then seems like the other triangles are like layers upon layers. Would you agree with that, or can they actually exist separately? Totally.
They can coexist separately.
Yeah.
Okay, they can. Like the example I made with a child with learning disabilities can theoretically exist. The
Right.
truth is, usually you would have some suspectability of either triangle 2, your parents attacking you or criticizing you, which will make you more susceptible to have a triangle 3, right? Or even that can make a triangle 3 with time. And you can probably have some incident, you might have traumatic events that sit on it. Of course, we can see how triangle 2 and 1 can interplay, but they can't stand alone. We can see patients that have a triangle 1 standalone, a triangle 2 standalone, and a triangle 3 standalone. One thing about triangle 1, we can see triangle 1 as a form of pain, right? But the techniques we use in triangle 1 in order to touch the pain are going to be relevant in any transformation, right? Because also when we want to reach into the pain of the child who's humiliated by his father or not attended to or whatever, we will use these strategies of activating and giving resources as basic strategies to open up the pain. This is central to memory reconsolidation, as we believe that activating the pain is a very important step. So they are standalones, but we can see that they intertwine. So it's more, I think in most people, we will probably find different combinations. And some triangles will be really intertwined and some will be just separate. Okay, if I'm thinking like of myself moving from country to country and going from like America to Israel and from Israel to America and having this really big problem in locating myself socially, that's a triangle 3, which kind of stands alone from other triangle 2 things, issues I might have, or triangle 1, etc. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited. So again, I want to thank you. That's the main thing. But also I want to say that I think I really love that you're tying in a very pragmatic aspect to this theoretical development, which is the idea of how to help train and supervise people with this, which, my love is training and supervision. So I'm particularly sensitive to that, right? So I really look forward to a very beautiful flow chart with the triangles and then the suspected origin, the usual markers, and the treatment, which is also something you can just kind of have as a map. And then no one will need to have Neta or Hans there in order to be able to follow it.
That's really our goal, to kind of get, but this is really dangerous of making it too superficial. So we're putting a lot of effort to find the right level of description in order that you have something that really works and helps, but doesn't make things like, okay, 1, 2, 3, this is chocolate cake, okay? But yeah, but I do think it can be very helpful in all these levels. Yeah.
Very exciting. Well, congratulations.
Okay, thank you very much.